Hello, and welcome to the Adventures in Arting podcast, where we analyze, explore, and celebrate the creative journey. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I am a working artist living outside of Boston. I've been hosting this podcast with my super special co-host and my mom, Eileen Shu Balzer, since 2012. Hi, Mom.
Hello, Julie.
So if you want to develop a strong and thriving art practice, and you know you do, I hope you'll check out myartpractice.com. So myartpractice.com is my monthly membership site, and it has a robust community, tons of great art content at your fingertips, day or night. That's the beauty of online, right? So my art practice is open this week to membership. So it's an opportunity for you to learn, to grow, to be part of a creative community. And one of the things that I personally love about the site is that it's designed to be flexible. If you're busy at the moment, the content will be there waiting for you whenever you're ready. If you're raring to go and it's 2 a.m., turn on your computer or your iPad and jump in. If you're a joiner, you can chat, submit your work for live coaching, join an accountability group, and enjoy all the various benefits of a warm and welcoming community. If you're more of a lurker, like someone I know named Eileen Shu Balzer, then you can tiptoe through the content without anybody knowing you were ever there. So don't wait. Today is the day. Membership is open for 1 week only. Visit myartpractice.com and sign up today. So we are going to be talking today on episode 164, which I've entitled Drawing at the Danforth, about a class that I've been taking at the Danforth Museum of Art here in Framingham, Massachusetts. And it's basically called Drawing at the Danforth. So the Danforth Art Museum is a very small art museum. Besides a small permanent collection, the Danforth also has rotating exhibits, often by local New England artists, along with some other national exhibits. And they also have an art school in the Danforth. And part of that is they also have classes for kids, for adults, for all sorts of people. I think they have an association with one of the universities. I can't remember when it was, and I probably should have looked it up. But there is an exhibit every year at the Danforth where there are a ton of sort of local artists exhibited. And I went last year to see it for the first time, and I fell in love with this one woman's work. Paula D, and I think it's Simone, it may be Simone, I'm not sure on the pronunciation. But I looked her up afterwards, as I often do with artists that I love. And I saw her work online, and then I realized that she teaches classes at the Danforth. And a lot of the classes that she teaches are classes that are right up my alley. They're monotype, they're collage, they're sometimes mixing monotype and collage, they're stamp carving, like all sorts of stuff. Like I was like, oh, this is so simpatico, and I admire her work, and I really want to take a class with her. So she has some like sort of beginner entry level classes, and then she has these advanced intermediate classes that you can't sign up for unless you've taken the beginner classes or the instructor knows you or something like that. And I thought, that stinks, because as much value as there is in starting at the beginning, I don't really want to pay all that money. And the Danforth is a good 40 minutes from my house. It's a lot to take like a 12-week class to get into the next level when I know I'm fine with the next level, right? So then I sort of like put it out of my mind. Then I got the Danforth, that was like a year ago. So then the Danforth summer catalog came out, and I noticed that she was teaching a drawing class. And I thought, it's short, like it's maybe 6 or 8 weeks. I guess it's not that short, but that felt like shorter than some of the other things. It was drawing, which is something that I always need to practice at and get better at. And the lovely benefit of it is that it was drawing at the museum. So it's not something that I necessarily can do sitting in my house, right? So I thought, okay, this will be like a winners all around situation. I get to see what kind of teacher she is. I get out of my house and get to go to the museum every week. It's a skill that I can use improvement in, all that kind of stuff. So I had the first class yesterday, and mom made me promise not to tell her at all about it because we're going to record this podcast in a couple of different parts over a few weeks to get a sense of it. Today is July 11th, 2024, and the first class was yesterday. So I will tell you that I walked in at 10 o'clock, everybody was already there. They were all sitting on their drawing stools. And then later, when I was leaving in the elevator, one woman said to me, "Oh, I didn't get your name because you were late." And I was like, "I was late?" So it does say in my email that it started at 10. So I can't understand how I was late, but maybe I was. Maybe I need to show up at 9:30 next time. I don't know. But that already put me up feeling on a bad foot because I hate being late to things. I am a person who is never late. I was anxious about the fact that I was arriving just on time. Anyway, so I would say there were three hardcore Paula fans who are students who have taken multiple classes with her. I talked to one of them in the elevator, and she said she's been through the same sort of printmaking class with Paula like 5 or 6 times, and she's taking the class that we're taking now like 2 or 3 times. And I said, "Oh," I said, "Is this like a great time that we're?" She's like, and she said to me, she really likes Paula's energy and her teaching style. And I thought that's great because that also feels to me like that's the reason I pick teachers. I've often said this to people: never pick a class because you want to make art like the teacher. Because at the end of the day, if they are worth their salt at all, you basically won't be able to make art like them because whatever they're doing, they've honed over years and years and years and years and years. But go with a teacher who's a really good teacher, whose energy matches your energy, whose energy excites you, who's interesting to you, who knows how to break down techniques and ideas, because then you'll learn stuff that's useful to you, stuff that you can actually take away. So I also liked Paula's energy. I thought she was making a huge effort to meet people where they are. It's a class where some people have never drawn, and a class where other people are very good drawers. Drawers, yes, with lots of drawing experience underneath them. And she's trying to give lots of individual attention. That said, it was very interesting because it wasn't a class. Really, she was like, "This is the," unless I missed something at the beginning, but she was like, "This is the assignment. You're going to take your sketchbooks, pick a couple pieces, do some thumbnails, and then we'll do that until like 11:30, and then you'll come back and we'll discuss what you made, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Okay." And then she came around and gave individual attention to everyone, which I also appreciated because, she's telling one person who's a beginning drawer ideas and techniques for capturing things. And she's asking me questions about like why certain things interested me, which I thought was really meeting me where I am. And also, not to brag or anything, but she did say I had excellent drawing technique, which I was like, "Oh wow," because I am one of the reasons I was screaming at people that they can draw is because I have always felt that I'm a person who can't draw, and I should get it into my thick skull. But I've been in enough classes now where the teacher or somebody else has said, like, "Oh, I really like your drawing," or "You have a good, you very expressive line," and stuff like that. I don't draw photorealistically, but I can, as it turns out, draw, and so can you. So can you, because it's just practice. Um, but so drew a bunch of thumbnails, and the thing that I realized partway through class is something that I think everybody needs to realize whenever they take a class, which is I come with the goal of just getting to know her as a teacher and practicing my drawing. And I realized within the first 10 to 15 minutes that I basically had hit those goals. So the question is like, well, what am I going to get out of this class? And I was like, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to get some ideas for work that I want to take home. So I started focusing my thumbnails down from actually like drawing what I saw in front of me to saying, like, I want to take the negative space between this teapot and this cup. That's an interesting abstract shape. I want to take the shape in these clouds from this landscape and steal it and figure out how I can turn that shape into stencils and masks that I can use when I jelly print, in the studio. And just thinking again of ways to translate what I'm seeing. And so my thumbnails changed. Like there's one drawing that I love that I have of, I did like the full portrait of these two boys. And then it kept getting closer and closer until my favorite thumbnail is basically of one of the boys, like his bangs coming across his forehead, just because it was such an interesting shape with these like crawling down spikes into this sort of soft expanse. And so I think like the key so often when you're, drawing, which basically is note taking, it's visual note taking. If you could, write a note of what it looked like and then get home and be able to translate that, then you should do that. But sometimes you need a drawing. And so for me, it was like a wonderful way of saying, of taking home what was interesting to me about the art in that moment. And now, for the last 2 days, I've been making all kinds of stuff inspired by that drawing class. So that's really exciting because I feel renewed and energized. So that is my class report for class one. Mom, do you have any questions or input?
No, but what's her art like?
Oh, it's wonderful. So she does abstract um monotypes and monoprints, and there's some collage mixed in, some drawing, and like when she describes herself, she basically says so much and so many of the same things that I say. It was like I was like, "Oh, I mean, you know how when you meet someone and you want to be like, I think we're best friends." But I didn't say any of that. I was like, Anyway, so she's inspired by nature. Check. She incorporates drawing and monotypes and collage and monoprints and all kinds of other printmaking. Check. You know, and like she's a sort of I would say she's an older woman in her 60s or even 70s maybe, but clearly like active, and she's got a strong New England accent. She clearly has like a really um she is passionate about teaching. She clearly enjoys it, and her work is just beautiful abstract. Like I have to say, I've seen it maybe twice in exhibits, and every time it stands out for me. It's bold, it's colorful, it's inventive. It's one of those things where like the more you look at it, the more you're like, how, but what? And I love that. I love work that becomes more intriguing. She's definitely like the reason I looked her up in the first place is because I always go through an exhibit and I think, what do I want to buy? Which is different than what do I want to make? Which is different than like what ideas do I want to steal? I was like, what do I want to buy? And she had a diptych that I was like, I would buy that. If I had the money, I would buy that. And I think it's just like, so I wrote her name down because I was like, A, I want to pay attention, but B, maybe she sells prints or maybe they're smaller stuff and I could do something like that. I also found out that she's the member because I cyber stalked her about a year ago. She's a member of, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but there is like a monoprint society. And I looked it up and bookmarked it as something that I wanted. It was like, I should think about joining this at some point because I bet they have like classes and exhibits and all sorts of stuff that would be related to things that are interesting to me. When I have some free time.
I just
Uh,
want to say one thing, which is cyber stalking has this very negative connotation, but the whole point of being on the internet is they want you to be able to find them.
It's true. It's not like I want her try to find her, pictures of her in her bathroom or something. I just
No,
wanted
but
to
I'm
find
just saying
like
it
her
implies
website.
something nefarious, but in point of
Yeah.
fact, it's not like you dug into her police files.
If only I could. No, it's I looked up, her website and I read her CV and I looked through like where she exhibits and sells and all that kind of stuff because I think always my interest in artists alive, dead, whatever is like I want to know the full breadth of what they have to offer. And since there's no book about her, it was like this was the internet is the book about her. So that is class one. I will definitely be back next week with the info on how it went in class two. I'm a little bit unclear on how this is going to be sustainable across like 8 weeks because it's this, we're going back to draw the same exhibit for 8 weeks. And I don't want to be a jerk about it, but I didn't find a ton of in the permanent collection. There's a ton of like stuff that I like. In the current exhibit, I was a little like, I don't know what to pick to draw because I don't find anything interesting. There's the juror for that show clearly likes portraits and other representational things, and it has a strong like of some sort of very flattened folk art stuff. And some of it is tough for me to look for like complicated and interesting relationships and shapes, because a lot of it is either very sort of flat and presentational or doesn't have a lot of sort of atmospheric stuff in it, which can be a beautiful and aesthetic, but it's just harder for me to pull information out of that because it's so its own thing already, you know? So I'm gonna have
Okay.
to think about that. Until next time, dear friends. Hey, so this is part two of our Danforth, or of our drawing at the Danforth episode. So I've had my second class, and I was concerned about what I was going to draw this week because I was not feeling enormous attraction to a lot of stuff. And then, of course, as soon as I got there, I found lots of stuff that I was interested in. And that was kind of exciting. So let's see, a couple overview things, which is one, I was super inspired by the class last week and ended up spending most of last week. All right, this is a weird thing to say. I'm not sure I was inspired by the class. I was inspired by what I did. In a way, it feels funny to call this a class because what I've actually really determined it is it's like we all go to the museum, we meet, we draw, and then we come together for about a half an hour to discuss what we made. And like, so it's more like sort of a community get together that I've paid for, which I really like and I'm enjoying. But I was inspired by the drawings that I did, and I ended up making a lot of art, a bunch of samples, some larger 16 by 20 pieces. I got really excited by them. I think I'm off to the races on a new series about it, which was really exciting and fun and fresh. And I thought, well, how am I ever going to get that excited again? But you guys, I am that excited again. So I first looked at this one piece of work and I thought, I bet I could make a stencil out of these shapes. And I started to like draw the negative spaces and ignore it's a painting of three people sort of stacked on each other almost. And so I started to draw the negative spaces and I thought that would make a great stencil. And I went home and I made the stencil and I hated it so much.
Why did you hate it?
Okay, so one, I think I overworked it. Like instead of making the stencil just the simple design that it was, I was like, oh, this is too simple. I need to add a flourish here and a line here and a this there. And then when I pulled the print, I was kind of like, wah, wah. And like this sometimes happens to me with stencils too, which is I like the reverse of the stencil as if the stencil was a stamp, partially because when I'm making the stencil, you know what I mean? I like the design, but then sometimes what you get as a result is not what
Mhm,
you like. So I
mhm,
almost wish that
mhm.
the stencil were a stamp or a screen. It wouldn't hold together though if it were in the reverse. So anyway, long story short, I'm sure everybody who's ever made anything has had the experience of the image in your head and what practically ends up your hands are just disappointing. Like it's just not what you wanted or expected. And for a while I was like, well, let me rework this and I can think about it. And then I was like, how badly do I want to make this stencil? Or am I just doing this because I feel like I ought to take something away from here, right? So then I started to think about like what really inspired me. Like what did I feel was like exciting and interesting? And I decided that I had spent some time drawing this one etching. So in case you don't know a lot about etching, and I don't know a lot about etching, so this is going to be the unknower educating the also unknower. So let's see where we get. But the basics of etching, as I understand it, is you take a plate, which is usually made out of metal, and then you basically your design gets burned into the plate with acid, and there's this whole process of like you use a special thing that blocks the acid in certain places and doesn't in others, and blah 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 blah. And the plate degrades over time as you use it, so you can only usually get a certain amount of prints out of it, because obviously every time you put it through the press the metal is getting pressed. Uh, but I mean, that said, you still do get a lot. But the nice thing about etchings is that they're incredibly detailed. They carry a lot of the uh, hand work of the art. That's the wrong words. I'm looking for the words. It's like you really get the sense of drawing in etchings. You get the sense of even like tiny little lines. You get the sense of If you could replicate a drawing 100 times, like that's what an etching is. It's beautifully done, and often they're in multiple colors and multiple passes, but often they're black and white. So this one etching that I was looking at it was it's just black and white, and it had so many different variations of black, like areas that were really dense and dark and areas that felt lighter, and it was kind of very gestural, and it felt, often I think we think of printmaking as kind of tight and controlled, but it was kind of loose and free, and I was so drawn to all of the texture in it. And I thought, the gelatin plate is such a magical tool that really allows you to do all kinds of printmaking without a press. And now that I have used a press quite a bit at the Concord Art Association, where I sometimes rent, pardon me, press time, I've actually discovered even more how great a gelatin plate is, because there's so much that you can do on a gelatin plate that you can also do on a press. That said, etching is not one of the things you can do on a gelatin plate. But I was like, can I fake it? Can I take whatever is like the essentials of etching and fake it on a gelatin plate? So, because I'm not ready to mess with like acids and whatever etching involves, right? That's a road I'm not ready to go down. But I figured maybe through making a kind of like holograph plate. And so another fun printmaking term for you. So a lot of times people talk about like printing plates. And what they're really talking about in essentials is actually a collograph plate. And a collograph is traditionally a plate that is made either by incising into it or by having raised areas. And it creates texture and all sorts of interesting kind of imagery and dimension and stuff on it. It's a beautiful process. And I'm actually taking a calligraphy class coming up this fall, which I'm super excited about. But I've been experimenting with a little bit at home. And so I thought maybe I can make one of these plates and give it a lot of texture. And then I started to think, like, what can I do to the surface to give it that kind of etching texture where it looks like lines have been drawn and you've pulled ink in it? Like, what can I possibly do? And so then I remembered back to in the way, way back machine. And this is why I wish I had kept better notes at that period of my life. But in my crafty life, I had played a lot with aluminum flashing tape, which I think plumbers and other people who do duct work use. It's actual aluminum, so it holds its shape the way that kind of aluminum does, but it has a slightly sticky back. And they use it, I think, to like where two pipes come together, or where like a pipe enters something. But why would you ever use it for its intended purpose, right? So I was like, I remember doing some embossing in my little like Cuttlebug machine, and I remember that you could put texture in it. At some point, there was I think where I made earrings out of foam and that tape, and I thought, let's see what I can do. And my first attempt was, guess what? A total failure. As it so often is. I hated the results. I didn't like what was happening. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to, and I was feeling grumpy, which is the fancy version of grumpy about the whole experience. But I am a believer in doing it again. If you fall off the horse, never get on the horse again. But if your art project doesn't work out, definitely try again. That's a personal philosophy and maybe not everybody's philosophy. So I was determined to work it out. And you know what, you guys? I did. And it's amazing. And it doesn't look like etching. Not really, but it's not really gelatin printing. It's not really etching. It's maybe sort of calligraphy, but it has some of the elements that I like about like the freedom of line and using this plate to kind of do reproductions over and over, and some of the toning issues with like different layers of black and stuff. So I'm super excited about that, and that's going to be a huge breakthrough. And so, again, another week of sketching at the museum that led somewhere totally unexpected. But, as there is always a but, um, it's just a reminder to me that the work of taking the idea somewhere is hard. And that's the thing that I think determines sort of whether you find like drawing useful to a certain extent. Because drawing is something that can train your eye, teach you a lot about proportions, help you learn about how pieces are put together, but only if you push yourself to ask those questions. Why is this arranged this way? You know, what do I think the artist was thinking? What interests me about this work that I want to take into my own work? Those are all the kind of things that turn an exercise in drawing from drawing into being a part of your art practice. Like when we talk about an art practice, that's part of what it is it's not just doing one act. It's a series of connected acts and thoughts and intentions and all that kind of stuff. So I feel really excited about that. And I'm excited to see where it brings me. And I really literally have no idea what week 3 will be because this has been a wild ride. And we're only 2 weeks in to drawing at the museum. So I don't know. What do you think, Mom?
One of the reasons you are so productive is you don't close off any avenues. I mean, who would sit around and say, "Hmm, I've been sketching at the museum. I think I'll try this with aluminum flash." I mean, who would think of that?
Well, it was logical in my mind
Yeah,
when I went there. But
but it's
actually,
not a natural segue for most people.
well, here's the thing that I'm going to argue with you about it because I actually think like this is a thing I remember from my childhood, which is if I would read something, you would say, "What does that word mean?" And I'll be like, "I don't know," and sort of guess it from context. And you would send me to the dictionary. And then when we finally had gotten the encyclopedia by shopping at Star Market every single week, picking up a volume every week as you go as a reward, right? You'd send me to the encyclopedia to look it up, or we'd call the library. And I think like that is always you have always advocated for like the next step.
I'll take credit for it. I'll tell you that when I was little, meaning in
Mhm.
like 6th grade, I used to collect the wrappers that these chocolates came in. They were printed aluminum foil, and I
Mhm.
used to just you scrape them out with your thumb so that they somewhat unwrinkle, and then you
Mhm.
just save them for no particular reason, but
They're
just because
pretty.
you like them. But so you have a family history of interest in aluminum foil.
There you go. It's my aluminum foil interest. Well, I think, it is actually, I was going to say, a coaching last night for my art practice. One of the topics we talked about really was like, how do you take sort of existing in the world as an artist and observing things and seeing things and that inspiration into actual, like the work of being an artist. And I have to say, for me, a lot of it gets processed through my notebook. Like, I am 100% not capable of doing that in my brain. It's almost like the difference between doing math in your head versus writing it down. Or something I've always admired, like about spelling bee contestants. I don't know how they do it out loud. I personally, and because I'm a visual person, I need to write it and look at it. And usually when I look at it, I can tell if it's correct or not, but I can't do it in the air. And so again, like when I'm trying to take an inspiration or idea or figure out what's next, I need that notebook to write down like this idea, and then that makes it easy for me to figure out how this idea leads to it becomes stepping stones so that I'm never making the leap to aluminum foil, so to speak, but it's like it's a baby step each time, and the baby steps are easy, but so that it feels like I went from looking at this etching to like aluminum foil, but really it was like 12 to 15 steps in between that were tiny little inches.
Can you describe, I mean, this may be asking a lot of you,
Mhm.
how you got from looking at the etching to the aluminum foil or flashing? Because it is not as if every day in your studio you're sitting around playing with the aluminum flashing. I think you haven't played with it in possibly several years. So
Yeah, I
what
mean, I
made
think
you go there?
so again, I think one of the reasons that it's so important to have experience with the tools and products in your space, whether it's a closet or an entire art studio or a rolling cart or whatever it is because if you don't know what your materials are possibly capable of, then you are really floating in the dark when you're thinking about what they can do, right? So that's why you have to have a lot of bad ideas, try a lot of bad ideas, and then make a leap from the bad ideas to some good ones. But so when I knew that what I liked was the texture of the when I knew what I liked was the texture of the etching, I started to think about texture tools. And texture tools, I was like, well, there are all these texture plates that people make with like hot glue and stuff like that, but those lines are too soft and too big. Well, I can maybe make a molding paste plate, but then again, like that texture is not the same as like an etching texture. And you know what I mean? It's like by process of elimination, going through my art materials and figuring out like what might be comparable. There was a while that I was trying to figure out if I could get string to do what I wanted, but then it was starting to get fussy as opposed to gestural, which is what I had liked about the original etching. And it's like by process of elimination, I finally, you're spitballing 100 things to see what will work, and then I was suddenly like, wait a second, doesn't aluminum tape take a ballpoint pen mark so that if you put the aluminum tape onto cardboard and sort of draw with a ballpoint pen, the mark will stay there? And I was like, now that could be interesting. And actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if I could have used a polystyrene plate. Wonder if I could still use a polystyrene plate to do. Now I'm thinking about what holds a mark, and that would also work. Okay. But that's what I mean. Like that's how it happens for me is
Mhm.
I'm like, here's the problem. What tool do I have in my studio, in my space, or that I've come across that would solve that problem? And then sometimes it goes sideways, as this one did, where I ended up using a different series of techniques, but the same idea, as I got closer and closer where I wanted to be. And I think, that's the other thing is not getting too like tied up in how it's supposed to be or how you want it to be, right? But like accepting it is what it is and kind of rolling with what you like about that.
So this is you identifying a problem you want to solve and then trying to figure out what is going to help you solve that problem, what
Yes.
supply, as
If
opposed to looking at a supply and saying, what can I do with this? Which is a
Mhm.
sort of backwards other kind of process. It's like a person who's a chef who wants a particular flavor in something that he or she is concocting, as opposed to someone who says, I just got this za'atar. What am I going to do with it?
Right.
Um,
But I think you need both, right?
right.
Like the
No
chef
doubt. Yeah.
can't get to the flavor without understanding how everything in their kitchen already works. So it's like you have to know the 100 things you can do with za'atar in order to figure out, oh, this needs a pinch of za'atar to make it work. And so the same thing is true here, which is I think there's the material exploration, which is when you actually, no, I didn't do this on purpose, but now I realize maybe I did it on purpose, which is one of the things in my artpractice.com, the membership site, is that there is an entire section dedicated to art materials and an entire section dedicated to art techniques, because you have to know your materials in order to fully explore your techniques, but you have to know techniques in order to fully explore your material. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're hand in hand, and there is a little bit of chicken and egg about them, because I wouldn't say that you can understand fully a material until you've tried it with some techniques, but you can't really figure out techniques until you really understand the materials. And that's, why you have to kind of hand in hand learn them.
So when you buy or encounter a new material,
Mm.
what process do you follow to try to understand sort of the parameters of what you can do with it?
So usually and I will say that this is something I didn't used to do, but lately, so I read the package just to see like how they're advertising marketing it. If it says like make big bold strikes with our new, opaque paint markers, then I'm like, oh, okay, information for me. It's opaque. The colors are meant to be bold, and it's probably a broad tip if it says big. It's not like a delicate thing. And let's find out then from there. Then I have questions, right? It's like initial information that you've given me. Then from there, I have questions like, does it go over paint? Does it, what does it do on different kinds of paper? How long does it stay wet? Can you mix the colors? And it's like every question leads to, it's like a choose your own adventure to a new question. And I think that's the sort of fun and exciting part of it. And it's also tailored to me. So, if, so Angela Fair, for instance, was recently on the podcast, and she's a watercolorist. And if we both were given the same art supply, even though I think we're both like naturally curious people, I think we would approach it differently, because she's trying to think about how she would use it in her work. And I'm trying to think about how I would use it in my work. And so we have different needs and interests. And even, two watercolorists or two acrylic painters are, again, going to approach it differently because you're interested in it in different ways. So I think of it like your example with za'atar. If I primarily cook Chinese food, then I'm thinking about, like, interesting. How does za'atar, which is Middle Eastern spice, come into Chinese food? What is it, similar to Chinese five spice? Is there a way that I could like bring it into what I do? Where somebody who cooks Middle Eastern food might be like, oh, this is lemon za'atar, and this is paprika za'atar, and this is, I mean, I don't know, I'm making these things up, obviously, but it's like within your lane, you probably have a specific set of questions or interests in what something will do for you. But I think the point, if I may eventually get to it as I roll through this, is that you need to understand what you want out of an art supply. And if you're a beginner, that's hard because you just don't know. And I think that's where you rely on tutorials and other things like that. We all have done that. But as you begin to go into the sort of advanced beginner category, and you're starting to figure out what supplies you like, what you're interested in, what the techniques and stuff you're interested in, then you start to ask the supplies, what can you do for me? Audition for me, supply. Dance supply. Show me what you got. For instance, I used to use a lot of water soluble products, and I loved them, and I loved that they were reactive, and I liked the way that that happened. And then I was like, no, I must have control, and I do not want you coming back to life, right? So instead of having regular gouache, I bought acrylic gouache, which is permanent. Instead of having, ink-based spray inks that are water reactive, I started buying acrylic spray inks, which are not. Instead of buying, I mean, and it like went on and on. And the more that I narrow down my art practice, the more that I find the supplies that work for the results that I like, for the process that I like.
Is there a recent thing that, not a holy grail, but something you've been searching for to resolve an issue or a problem that you would like someone to make, or you would like to find where you can
Ooh,
buy it? What are some of your wish things
what are some of my wish
or
things?
supplies?
That's so interesting. What's crazy is I actually don't have, oh, there's one thing. There's one thing that I have wanted for years, and I
Was it a
know that it will never,
manufacturer?
well, I know it will never get made because it's so nichey, and there's just not enough people who would want it. But I have long, long wanted some sort of cutter or guillotine thing or something that would cut speedy carve in a very straight, very clean line. It is one of the skills that is the toughest for beginners, especially when they're trying to make geometric blocks, where it's really important that the block is totally straight and lines up perfectly. And it's such a nichey thing because Speedy Carve is a very particular kind of product. It's made of a specialized kind of rubber, and I can't figure out, who else would be interested. I mean, they have like styrofoam cutters, but that's not going to work on Speedy Carve. It's like a hot wire cutter. They have, all sorts of saws and tools, but again, like what works for wood and or even plastic is not going to work for Speedy Carve. So that's a very specific tool. If anybody out there knows of it, has invented it, like, let me know. That would be awesome.
That
I
could
would love
also go in the category, which I know you were researching for someone the other
that.
day,
Mhm.
of things that would help people who have problems with their hands. Maybe they have arthritis. So it's not exactly millions of people, but there would be a group of people for whom this would be a godsend, and probably maybe for some other things too. You'd have to experiment with it.
Like so many things, You don't, I'm sure nobody expected metal flashing tape to get used, I'm sure, in art projects either. But, it's like you just never know what somebody else is going to see the possibilities in. I mean, look at deli paper and, all those poor sandwiches that have to go naked because we artists want to use deli paper to paint and collage, right? Sad little sandwiches. But I think the class at the Danforth too, one of the things I like about the sharing at the end, and I wrote about this a little bit in my newsletter this week, but one of the things that I like about it is the sense of like this woman and I both drew the same picture at totally different times, and neither of us were aware that we had each sat in front of that painting for a while. Her version of it, her drawing of it and my drawing of it are different. Like you can tell it's the same piece because it's a bee on a flower and there's just not a lot else in it. So it's a bee on a flower. But, her drawing eliminates like the square frame, really focuses on getting the bee very perfectly and the flower with a couple leaves. My sketch is much more like a value sketch, getting the whole square piece where the values are, what's light, what's dark, what's mid-tone. And then I have a detail sketch where I'm looking at like how the vines and stuff are overlapping because I was interested in thinking of that as like a stencil or a stamp or some sort of interwoven idea of just shapes. And it was like a wonderful microcosm of how two artist brains can be so different. Two people can look at the same thing and see different value in what they're looking at. Meaning, and I don't mean light and dark when I'm talking about value there. I mean, see different things that are of interest, that are worthy, that are things they want to talk about and think about and pull out. And that sort of happens in various forms over and over, right? Where people look at things differently and you really get to see it in that half hour. And I like that.
Do you
The question,
remember, like in
yeah.
high school art class, often everybody draws the same thing. They
Mhm.
put out a bowl of fruit, or they put out,
I
a
remember
statue,
ferns.
and they say everybody's going to draw this today. When the teacher or someone was critiquing it, what kinds of things did they say?
It's hard for me to remember that long
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, I know. It was
I
when
know.
you rode your
When
mastodon
I
to school.
exactly, when I rode my dinosaur to school. But my memory of it was that we were not encouraged to do much more than get as realistic as possible.
Okay.
And that there was a lot of I was most proud of my work in art class when it approached being photorealistic and much less, you know what I mean? It was not like a, hey, and just interpret this as you wish. And it was certainly not, I mean, I can even say like in my drawing class, I'm a weirdo and that
In
everybody else
current
is,
drawing class.
yes, in my current drawing class, I'm a super weirdo. I mean, I've probably been a weirdo in every class, but I'm definitely a weirdo in my current drawing class. Everybody there, for the most part, are like really good, realistic drawers. And they often render like fantastic pencil sketches of these paintings and other artworks that we're looking at in the museum. And I usually have like a value drawing and then a negative space drawing and then some weird detail that I'm getting obsessed with or a shape that I'm like poking at. And I just know that they're looking at my sketchbook going, what are you doing, weirdo? Not in a bad way, but just like, it's definitely weird. It's definitely different than what everybody else is interested in. And I think like the biggest thing I have learned about being an artist is kind of the biggest thing I've learned about being a person at the same time. Which is like you got to go your own way. You will only be, you know, as you can only be as unique as you allow yourself to be. And like I remember when I was selling earrings at the farmers market last year, and this woman came up to me and she was like, "I love your earrings so much, and I would love to buy some for my granddaughter, and she would look so fantastic in them, but she won't wear them." And I said, "Oh, does she not wear big earrings because the earrings I make are all giant because that's what I like to wear. And she said, no, she won't wear anything that her friends don't wear first. So they all have to have the
Ah,
same thing. Right? And I was like, "Oh gosh, I do not wanna be young again," because that certainly is one of the pain points, and some people never grow out of it, where they still have to wear the same things to their friends. They still have to conform to what's expected, and I think the exciting part of being an artist is the more you lean into your weirdo-ness, the more you lean into who you really are, like, all that kinda stuff, it's like that's what makes your work unique and special is its you-ness because you are unique and special, you know? So I'm the older I get, the more I'm willing to be a weirdo. In fact, on my first date with my husband, we were having the whole get to know you talk at Starbucks. And he was like hesitating about something. And I said, come on, man, just let your freak flag fly. If I like you, I like you. And if I don't, I don't. And now we'll know.
you actually said that?
I did.
Okay, good.
And his deep, dark secret is that he's really into Magic the Gathering. So, since I had heard of it and it didn't sound like it was terrible, I decided it wasn't that freaky and I could let him be a weirdo in his own way too. So,
Ah, but he
you know,
didn't tell you he's also into Dungeons& and Dragons.
that's true. But they go kind of hand in hand, I feel like. Okay, so that's our week 2 at the Danforth Museum. We'll be back with one more installment to get us to week 3 of drawing at the museum. So we are picking up today on July 29th. This is after having had my third class at the Danforth. And I showed around prints that I made last time. You remember with the metal
Yeah.
tape, the duct work tape or something like that's not actually duct tape. Anyway, regardless, I also discovered on Amazon that you can actually get the flashing tape in a 12-inch roll, which means I can get rid of the seam marks in my prints, which is super exciting to me. So I have bought yet another hardware store supply that I will never need, but I do need so very badly. And I drew some more things, including returning to a piece that I had started on last week and sort of never finished. And it was interesting because the teacher came by when I was working on that piece and she said to me, oh, you're back to this one. And I said, oh, well, I didn't get everything I needed last time. Right. And she was like, okay, and I sort of went on and I was thinking about that. And I was like, w- there are lots of sort of drawing classes that are hard for me because one of very popular classes where like a model will hold a pose for like 3 months, the same pose. And, like, I've been to those classes and I've done those things, and to me, the way that I work, it is so boring to try to
Yeah.
figure out how to approach this thing, especially because you often have to sit in the same place because people get weirdly and I understand it's not even weird. They're drawing one drawing or one painting for the whole 3 months. So they need to be in exactly the same place every single time. Right. So I remember this one painting class I took at the Art Students League where I somehow ended up like very close to this naked guy's crotch at such a weird level where like the only thing I was looking at basically was like his crotch and then sort of up into his face. It was just I came late, I was like one of the last people called into the
Right.
classroom. And so I got like one of the worst spots. So I actually had from that period of time, I finally just gave into it. And I have like 10 to 12 paintings of his anatomy, which is not exactly what was interesting to me about the human figure. And so, it's like one of those things where wherever you're seated becomes your destiny on those really long drawings. So I actually prefer the classes where the model holds the pose for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, because then it's like you get a quick gestural sketch, you get an idea of what's going on, and you're moving on. And it kind of doesn't matter where you're sitting because every seat is good and every seat is bad. So all of that said, it made me think about like actually it was a surprise to me that I went back to this piece to do some more drawings from it because the first time I drew it, I had a very clear drawing of what it looked like and then a little sketch of some stuff that interested me. But when I got home, which is the part that's actually more interesting to me about the class is what I do with the drawing information when I get home. But when I got home, I was like, I don't feel like I have enough information here to tease further out the idea that was in my brain that's happening here. So I was like, I need to return to that. Um, and so as a non-returner, it was interesting to go back to it and say, like, okay, so a week away, is there something new I see? Or now that I have the glimmer of an idea and I'm sitting here, which is different than just drawing something for information, it's like you're a prejudiced jury at that point, looking at the evidence with a particular suspect in mind. And so I started to draw, and it was actually a very quick experience because I was like, oh, I get it. Like a light bulb went off for me because I was looking for this thing. Right.
Mm.
And then, in fact, the same was true then when I got home, which is I had been very stuck on a piece. And I actually sent you a picture of it. And I was like, I like it. There's some stuff. I don't know. It's in process. And then I sent you a picture after I felt like it was done. And you were like, oh, you fixed it. And what I had done, although I don't know anybody could tell by looking at it, but the inspiration for it was a paint. It was a print. It's a layered screen print of a bee on a flower, and in the sort of corners of this, gosh, it couldn't be more than 8 by 8. It's a small screen print. There were like some vines and stems and leaves that kind of crossed over each other, and I kind of got charmed just in thinking about like the maze of things crossing over each other, and how does it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, but like, does the negative space create the positive space? Does the positive space create the negative space? I just went down a whole tunnel in my brain. And so when I was trying to sort of fix this piece that I was struggling with, what I ended up doing was literally cutting away with a craft knife all these kind of overlapping lines and removing pieces of the collage and then adding new pieces into like the missing places, kind of like inlay, and adding.
Mhm.
Anyway, it just completely transformed the piece, and it was absolutely directly inspired by this tiny little corner of this tiny little screen print and the second visit there. And so that was an exciting thing that happened this week based on that class.
You usually send
Have
me
I?
these things like at 11 o'clock at night. I'm already in bed, and my brain is not really as sharp as my brain is. It's not at its peak, and so then I have to turn it back on again and really look because I want to be sure that I don't just dismiss you, but I have something thoughtful to say, helpful to say. Otherwise, I'll pretend I'm asleep and tell you the next day. My secret is I try to be thoughtful.
That is a secret. None of us can tell.
What a terrible secret.
No. So, well, the thing is, like, a lot of times, the time that first of all, I will say I'm a natural night owl, so I feel more creative sort of after 9 o'clock than I do before 3 o'clock.
No, I'm not criticizing the fact that you said. I'm just saying the timing sometimes
Is not ideal for
requires
you.
me to turn back on again.
I end up finding that, like, after bedtime for my son, there's like a
Yeah.
period of maybe like 8:30 to 11 or 9:30 to 11, or if I'm really pushing it, 9:30 to midnight, depending how long he's been up, when I just feel like I hit a real stride creatively. I also think it's a time when I try to spend most of the day doing my quote unquote work, which is like,
Mm.
you know, video editing, typing things, emailing, like that kind of stuff. And then like the nighttime is the time when I give myself the freedom to play. So I think like as part of my art practice, it is important to me to sort of understand my biorhythms along with like how much time I have available to me to do these creative projects, because you want to think about that, in terms of what you bite off and where a natural sort of stopping point is. But I will say my husband often has to text me and be like, "Are you planning on coming to bed tonight?" Which is the answer is maybe. Maybe depends how exciting things are up in the studio.
He's a day person, a morning person.
He is.
One of the things I remember, my father used to be very much a night person, and he would work in his study probably until 3, 4 in the morning routinely. And then I also was a night person. And I remember him saying at a certain point, he got to a certain age, and he didn't have the stamina that he used to have to like work for 12 hours, writing for 12 hours in a row. And I now find, just as a heads up to you, I now
Yeah.
find that at my age, I have to turn off the lights a little earlier.
That's
So who
great.
knows
That
if
would be
that'll
better for
happen.
me. I mean, like I'm much more on everybody else's biorhythms in this house because my kid is definitely up with the sun if I can get to bed earlier. But I dream of the day when that's not when I get to stay up until whenever I
It'll
want.
come. And then
Anyway,
you'll be dreaming of the day when he used to be everywhere and you knew everything he was doing. And now you
that's
have to
true.
wait for a text which you'll parse in 47
Mhm.
different ways to figure out what's really going on.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. So we're halfway through class at the Danforth, and I'm trying to think about what I want out of the second half of the class and sort of what um, I'm thinking about. And what I would say is like, to a certain extent, like Dianu, as we would say, like it is enough. Like I've gotten a lot out of it. If nothing else happens, like I'm happy, I'm satisfied, I'm full up. But I think going forward, what I'm thinking about is, do I want to revisit anything I've already looked at? Do I want to issue myself a challenge of some kinds? Because I'm not going to lie, like sometimes I look at some of the artwork and I'm like, that's going to be really hard to draw, and I don't want to do that. But maybe, you know what I mean? As an exercise for myself, I really ought to. I also have some questions about, so the Danforth has a small permanent collection, and then it has a larger space dedicated to the current exhibit. And so I have some feelings that I should draw from the current exhibit because it won't be there, whereas the permanent collection will most likely be, although permanent collection pieces do change, but it will most likely, most of it will be there the next time I go to the museum. Um, and so, then again, I'm also caught between many things in the technical collection. I'm thinking ahead, so I'm speaking ahead. Many things in the permanent collection are more technically uh, well put together, beautiful, perfect than things in the current exhibition. And so
Okay.
drawing from them, it's like it's always a question of like if you're drawing from a picture of a person that's distorted, and then your drawing is a distortion of the distortion, it's like playing a game of telephone where you end up with a bar of soap at the end, of the conversation instead of the, toaster that it all started
But
with.
is it a
And
fascinating
so,
bar of soap? Is it
yes,
a,
it's this bar of
you
soap that
know,
can do many
a
things.
compelling bar of soap?
Compelling bar of soap. So I have to make some decisions there. And so class is in 2 days. And I'm thinking sort of in the back of my mind that since it is a drawing class, perhaps it would be good for me to scare myself a little with something that is hard to draw. And then, because I've mostly been taking this class as a chance to get information to an inspiration for work that I do in my own studio. But maybe I could take it at more face value as a class that's
Yeah.
about meant to be about drawing and try to go for a very ambitious drawing. Although
Figure out
it
what
sounds
it
really
what it means to you that something's hard to draw.
so okay, I'm going to explain what it means for something's hard to draw. Something that's hard to draw is something that requires me to do it for a long time. And I know that sounds terrible, but like I definitely sound like someone with ADD. I get bored really easily with certain tasks, and I get really bored when I'm drawing sometimes, which is one of the reasons I never thought that I was an artist, because I have patience for a lot of things, but sitting and getting a shadow perfectly, or the curve of something just right, or the gradations of dark to light to round an apple is so mind numbingly boring to me. I can't even, but I could weave paper for like 40 hours. So
Yeah, that
it
sounds
is
terrible to
so,
me.
yeah, exactly. So that's the thing, which is like, for some reason, anything that I look at and I'm like, oh, that's going to take a long time to draw accurately, I'm like, I can't do that. That's too hard. And by hard, I mean, I would have to force myself through something that I don't enjoy doing. And so then I go back and forth, which I think a lot of us do, about like, is this like medicine that's good for me? So I should do it? Or am I like a whole grown up adult and I don't need to do things that are good for me that I don't enjoy when there are other stuff that I would enjoy. I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell.
Are
What
you
do you think?
maybe well, I'm thinking there are, for example, there are recipes that are can be shortened by taking different shortcuts. Will the result
I
be
mean, am I
just
making
as
short
good as
puff
doing it
or
the
long
long
puff or
way?
whatever?
You know, maybe to
So,
some people, but maybe I won't learn as I mean, the question
yeah.
is, do you how much of a challenge are you looking for, and are you avoiding something that you think you can't do by calling it boring? I don't
See,
know the answer to this, but the question is, why
mhm.
does every maybe the way you're doing the shadowing on the apple is not the only way to do the shadowing on the apple.
No, that's not the only way to do the shading on the apple. And so the answer is I do the short puff version or the rough puff version, whatever it's called when you're baking, right? The Great British Baking Show way. I do the quick way of shading every time so that it is more gestural, more dramatic. It's a bigger step. It's like boom, 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 right? And it's very much the artist's hand, which is a style I like to see and it's a style I like to do. Now, I have taken classes, and the reason I know it's boring to me is because I've sat there and done it before. And like, is it true that if I draw the same, was my 15th painting of this man's anatomy better than my first? Yes.
How is it different?
Um, what I got bored and I started using weird colors. And I started like
Okay.
just doing stuff to do it, which often happens. And I do think like your first idea is never your best idea and all that kind of stuff. So, like, will I make a better drawing if I spend 2 full hours staring at one item and drawing it for 2 hours? Yes, I will. There's no question. It'll be more detailed, it'll be more comprehensive, it'll be more carefully done, it'll be more true to the subject, it'll be all those things. But the question is, will I take away from that experience, what's the more there? Because I already know
What
that I
it also
can
well,
do it.
what it sounds to me, maybe I'm wrong about this, but what I'm taking away from what you're saying is that by spending more time on it, it will be more realistic, as if that's
Yes.
the goal. When maybe
Yes.
by putting in the different colors that you weren't thinking of at first, you'll be getting at an emotion, you know, or a feeling about the subject that you weren't at first because you were so concentrating on the realistic. I mean, I think this is a tension when you're drawing things because you still have maybe the dregs of that old high school art class feeling that if you can't realistically draw a pear, what kind of artist are you? You know, if you can't draw a
Mhm.
cow, forget it.
Although, I mean, here's what I'll say,
Which you
which
know,
is
you know
mhm.
intellectually that that's wrong, the wrong approach for you. You know intellectually it's
Well,
not
A, I know I
satisfying to you.
can draw a cow,
Yeah,
and
but you used to
B,
not
I
think
know
you
that
could. And how do you know you
that's
can? Because
true
you've tried it.
because I've done it. Yes. And so that's the question. It's not like I'm not having a theoretical conversation about like should someone sit and draw the same painting
No,
for
I know
two
that.
hours?
No, this is you. This is you. And what
Yeah.
I'm saying is
Someone should.
maybe you're looking at and you're not inspired by this guy's anatomy, but you might have been
Mhm.
inspired by something else about the guy
I have a very
if you
nice
had had
picture of
the
his face
opportunity
hanging in
and
my
not have your
wall,
vision right, if you had not had your vision blocked by something
being
large,
very close. I do actually have a picture of him, of his face, where I'm looking up at him,
right?
which was my
And you're much
view
more
in my house.
yeah, I just think that you need to think about what is it that you're drawing? What is it about what you're drawing that is working for you, compelling to you, making you feel something, think something? And it might not be the most central thing. It might be a fly on a piece of fruit that's more interesting to you than the stack of fruit. I mean, when you're drawing
I
these
agree.
things, which whatever
I
you
agree.
are
But
drawing in this foray to the museum, Just
Mhm.
find some part of something that you'd like to look at for a while, and it doesn't have to be the obvious.
Okay, but that's the problem, which is
Yeah,
that's
that's the
already
problem.
what
You
I'm
have to think
doing.
about it. That problem is you can't just plunge in drawing without
No,
thinking
I think
about it.
you're completely
Okay,
misunderstanding the problem. The issue is that that's already what I'm doing, which is
okay.
I draw the corner of a print, I'm interested in the way the leaves overlap, and it comes into my studio. Like, I'm
So what's
there.
wrong
I
with
get
that?
that part, right? So the great question that I have is like, is that what this class is? Is that it? Like, is that what this is? And I just keep doing this for 3 more weeks? Or should I be trying to get something else out of it? That's the question.
Well, how will you know unless you keep on drawing?
Well, I mean, so that's the thing, which is I like to set as a goal for myself. So I don't want to show up at the museum on Wednesday and just kind of be like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I like to say, okay, I'm going to try to pick something that I feel like I can stick with for 2 hours. You know what I mean? And just draw that thing. Or am I going to say, you know what? I think what I am going to do is keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm going to look for stuff that interests me and like grab a little here, grab a little there, sort of on. I've been averaging about 3 pieces during what ends up being about an hour and a half. So it's about half an hour per piece that I end up spending, because we should probably spend about a half an hour talking and sharing at the end. So that's sort of where I'm at. And I think like that's a good for me thing with classes, whether you're taking them online or in person, is to think about like, what is it you want to get out of it? It's almost
Right,
always the
but you
first
don't have
question
to
I
be
ask a
rigid about
student.
it
Right.
because you want to be open to seeing something that you suddenly notice. I mean, maybe
Yes.
you're
And then
suddenly interested in the frame of something, not at all the image. Maybe you're interested in one of the chairs in the museum, if there are chairs. I just feel that you're being too A-list or too A personality minded about this. I must go to the museum and spend these 2 hours getting my absolute most out of this experience, be productive.
see, I think that this is a question of this what works for me to be satisfied with the experience is to have a goal and achieve the goal. And the goal can be as simple as like plenty of people show up to classes with me and say, like, I'm just here to have a good time, or I'm just here
All right.
to, learn something new.
So
And like
let's
that, it
remove
can
that
be
part.
the
You're
goal.
not there to have a good time. You're there to emerge with a product. Is that what you're telling me?
No,
What are you
I'm
telling me?
trying to figure out what it is I want to take away from the class.
Yeah.
Like, am I looking for more bits of information of strands that I can take into my own work, like I have for the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Or do I feel satisfied that I've like scratched that itch, so to speak, and I still have plenty more stuff that I haven't mined in the sketchbook? And am I looking then to take away a new experience, meaning like taking on a challenging drawing and seeing what happens during that process, or drawing something that, actually doesn't interest me and seeing if I become interested in the process of drawing? Or so what I'm trying to figure out what it's not having a product, but it is having an experience. And for me, part of having a good time, because this is not a socializing class, nobody talks to each other while everybody's quietly drawing in the museum, right? It's not like when you're in a classroom full of people and you're chatting while you're working, which is a very social experience. And I love going to classes like that and just talking to people. This is a very much like it's like going to the museum by yourself, except that you share for half an hour at the end. I don't know how else to explain it. So it's like the
Okay.
question every time for me then is like, if I'm going to spend an hour and a half in solitude with my sketchbook and this limited palette of work and a pencil, what
Right.
is it? This the experience that I want to have. And so it's not like this is going to ruin my life or my day, or it's a dramatic, life and death question, but it is one of, I think you should know when you're going into any situation, really sort of what you're hoping to get out of it, so that you can feel sort of not Monday morning quarterback it, but be like, oh, this was a success. I got what I wanted, or this was a success and I didn't get what I wanted. And isn't that interesting? But it's like, if you don't have any goal, for me at least, I find that really hard because then it's like you're wandering through, it's hard to make decisions, you never don't get down to business. I see lots of people who come to this class wander around the gallery for 10 minutes trying to find a piece of work they want to paint. And since we've been looking at the same two galleries for 3 weeks, that can only be because they don't really have a goal in mind at the moment.
What prevents you from going to a different gallery? Do they restrict you to those 2 galleries? Is there some
The
artificial
museum
reason?
is composed. It's a small museum. It is
Okay. Okay,
composed
so maybe that's
of
part of the
these
issue then.
2 galleries.
Because if I
That's it.
told you go to Museum of Modern Art or Metropolitan or the
Or
MFA
the
or any
MFA, or to the Isabella Stewart
and
Gardner
go
Museum.
I'd
We're gonna
find
say
something,
that a
you
lot.
would be all over and you would be
Yeah,
exposing yourself. You would be utilizing the fact that you're allowed to be in the museum with your pencil and your sketchbook and have this free
right.
time to do this. So part of the problem for you may be the
Mhm.
limited nature of their
It is. It's a
collection.
limited palette. It's a limited amount of stuff, an enormous amount of it because the show that's there right now, the jurors who juried the show favored representational work, particularly portraits, and a lot of my interest is in abstract work. The permanent collection has almost no abstract work in it, so I have
Okay,
actually
so
found it
maybe
very difficult to have gut
all right, that's not
reaction
a good
interest
fit for you.
in a lot of the
But
work.
that doesn't mean you can't get something out of it. But and it also may be a guideline to you for future courses that you take to be sure that it's it's going to be in a place that's going to be inspirational to you.
But it's
Is
so hard
is
to
the Danforth
know.
collection based on a few people's personal
No,
collections
it's
originally?
not like a dead famous person. They have I don't know where the permanent collection came from, but they have a series
That's
of
what I'm at.
rotating shows. Sometimes it's a single person show. This happens to be a New England artists show. It was an open call that people were juried into, and like I saw this same show last year and loved it, and then I saw it this year. And listen, no offense to the work that's in the show and to the people who are in it, because it's a beautiful show, but it's not my taste,
Okay.
right? And so I am finding this to be interesting from an intellectual point of view because ended up choosing a lot of stuff from the permanent collection and very
Okay.
little from the show, which is the majority of the
Okay.
building. So it's just complicated. And again, it comes back to what I think I might do if I'm feeling really daring now that I really think about it. Is I might draw the teacher of the class has an abstract piece in the show, which I really like. So I might draw her piece and then she can critique my drawing of her piece, which
Can
might be
you
an
draw
interesting
things that aren't part of the different
thing.
exhibits, like part of the building?
It's been a long time since you've been to the Danforth. It's
Right, I don't
not much
that's what I'm saying. I'm
architecturally.
not
It's
trying
like
so
it's like a box.
okay,
It's not like there's architecture or like molding or
I got it.
it's a very modern box.
Okay.
So, not a lot. But yes, could I draw like urban sketching style? Could I secretly place myself behind some of my classmates who are drawing pictures and then draw the overall gallery in the museum? I could. That would be an interesting idea. Also a fun way of changing, of flipping the script. So lots of possibilities.
Good.
3 classes ahead. We've been talking for a while. This podcast is getting very long, so I want to make sure to wrap up. And if anything exciting happens in the last 3 classes, I will be sure to check back in and let you know.
Okay.
So, if you want to improve your art skills, learn more about art history, become part of a vibrant community, develop a thriving art practice, grow your professional skills, connect with like minded artists, learn how to focus your art time, make better artwork, discover your personal voice, myartpractice.com is an online community dedicated to helping you create, shape, sharpen, and maintain a sustainable art practice that feeds your need to be creative and productive. And it is only open this week. So ask yourself if what you're doing today is getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow. My art practice has been specifically designed to offer content to both beginner and advanced artists. It's for both hobbyists and professionals. As long as you're interested in starting, developing, or maintaining an art practice, then my art practice is for you. So let me give you an example. In this upcoming cycle, the professional skill we're working on, and if you're a hobbyist, you might be scared of that idea of a professional skill, or even if you're a professional, you might be worried about it. But the one we're working on is taking great photos of your artwork. And great photos are key, yes, for portfolios and websites and Etsy shops, but they're also key for social media sharing or simply for your own personal records, right? The focus of my art practice is on creating a unique art practice that fits your goals, your schedule, and meets you where you are. It satisfies your needs as an artist. So enrollment opens for just 1 week, 5 times each year. And like I said, this is that week. My art practice is open for enrollment right now. So don't miss out and sign up today. You can visit myartpractice.com and get help reaching your art goals. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me at juliebalzer.com or all over social media as at Balzer Designs. I hope you'll sign up for the free weekly newsletter. That's the best way to make sure that you keep up on the latest news. There's a big button on the homepage of juliebalzer.com where you can do that, or you can go to the show page for this podcast to find the link. If you'd like to help the show, you can leave a review, mention us on social media, or tell a friend. All of those things help other people find the show. So thank you so much for listening and for subscribing. We'll see you the next time on the Adventures in Arting podcast.